The security footage at the Metropolitan Museum of Art captured her last moment perfectly. 10:14 p.m. Natalie Ashworth, wearing a bespoke emerald gown worth more than most houses, turned to the camera, smiled a chilling, knowing smile, and stepped into the elevator. By 10:15 p.m., she didn't exist. When her husband, billionaire mogul Broderick Ashworth, woke up the next morning, he didn't just wake up to an empty bed. He woke up to an empty bank account, a federal indictment, and a viral video of his wife exposing his darkest secrets to the world. She didn't just leave him, she erased him. This is the story of the most expensive divorce in history. The air inside the grand ballroom of the Pierre Hotel smelled of expensive perfume, stale champagne, and desperate ambition. It was the annual Titans Gala, a fundraising event where New York's elite gathered to pretend they were charitable while cutting throat-slitting business deals over plates of lukewarm risotto. Broderick Ashworth stood at the center of the room, holding court. At 45, Broderick was a man who took up space. He was broad-shouldered, with hair the color of polished steel and a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. As the CEO of Ashworth Dynamics, a defense contracting firm that had recently secured a controversial government tender, he was currently the most powerful man in the room. "The merger is all but signed," Broderick boasted to a small circle of sycophants, swirling the amber liquid in his crystal glass. By Monday morning, Ashworth Dynamics will control 60% of the private security sector on the East Coast. It's a monopoly in all but name. The men around him chuckled nervously. They hated him, but they feared him more. Standing slightly behind him, like a beautiful silent shadow, was his wife, Natalie. Natalie Ashworth was 32, stunning in a way that made people uncomfortable. She wore a floor-length emerald silk gown that clung to her silhouette, her dark hair pinned back in a severe, elegant chignon. Diamonds, a gift from Broderick for their 5th anniversary, glittered at her throat and ears. To the outside world, she was the perfect trophy, quiet, decorative, and obedient. She reached out and gently touched Broderick's arm. "Darling," she said, her voice a soft melody that barely rose above the din of the jazz band. "My head is throbbing. The lights are a bit intense tonight." Broderick didn't even look at her. He just patted her hand condescendingly, his eyes still fixed on a rival CEO across the room. "Take an aspirin, Natalie. We can't leave yet. The senator hasn't arrived, and I need a photo op." "I wasn't asking to leave," she corrected him, her tone remarkably steady. "I'm just going to step out to the terrace for some fresh air. Maybe visit the powder room." "Fine," he snapped, finally glancing at her with a flash of irritation. "Don't take long. When the senator gets here, I want you on my arm. And fix your lipstick. It's looking a bit pale." "Of course, Broderick." Natalie turned away. She didn't walk fast. She didn't look frantic. She moved with the grace of a woman who had nowhere to be, but exactly where she was. She navigated through the crowd, nodding politely to the wives of her husband's board members, women who looked at her with a mixture of pity and envy. They knew Broderick had a temper. They knew about the rumors of his meetings with younger associates. But they also saw the diamonds. Natalie reached the heavy oak doors leading to the main corridor. She paused for a fraction of a second, looking back at her husband. Broderick was laughing at his own joke, his head thrown back, oblivious. He looked like a king on his throne, unaware that the castle was built on sand. Natalie pushed the doors open and stepped into the hallway. The moment the doors clicked shut, the performance dropped. Her posture shifted. The vacant, docile expression vanished, replaced by a look of razor-sharp focus. She didn't go to the powder room. She didn't go to the terrace. She walked briskly toward the service elevators at the far end of the corridor, clutching her clutch purse tightly. Inside that purse was not lipstick or a compact mirror, but a burner phone, a cloned key card, and a USB drive containing 3 terabytes of encrypted data. She pressed the button. The doors slid open immediately. Inside was a member of the catering staff, pushing a cart of dirty dishes. He looked up, startled to see a woman in a 5-figure gown in the service lift. "Ma'am, this is for staff only," the young man stammered. Natalie reached into her purse and pulled out a thick envelope. She tossed it onto the cart next to a half-eaten shrimp cocktail. "You didn't see me, Thomas." The young man froze. He hadn't told her his name. He looked at the envelope, then back at her, but the doors were already closing. As the elevator descended to the loading bay, Natalie stripped off the diamonds. The necklace, the earrings, the bracelet. She dropped them into a trash bag she pulled from the side of the lift. They were insured for $3 million, but to her, they were shackles. The elevator dinged at the basement level. The loading dock was cold and smelled of diesel exhaust. A grey, nondescript delivery van was idling near the exit ramp. The driver's side window rolled down. A woman with short, spiky blonde hair and a scar running through her left eyebrow looked out. This was Riley, a former forensic accountant whom Broderick had fired 2 years ago for asking too many questions about his offshore accounts in the Caymans. "You're 2 minutes late," Riley said, popping the trunk. "Broderick loves the sound of his own voice." "It delayed me," Natalie said, tossing the bag of jewelry into a dumpster as she walked past it. She opened the back door of the van. Inside, the emerald gown was discarded in seconds, replaced by jeans, a nondescript grey hoodie, and worn sneakers. Natalie tied her hair up in a messy bun and put on a pair of thick-rimmed glasses. She climbed into the passenger seat. "Is it done?" Riley grinned, tapping the laptop resting on the center console. "The algorithm just went live. It's crawling through his servers as we speak. By the time the market opens in Tokyo, his stocks are going to be in freefall. But the real fun starts when the FBI gets the anonymous tip in about 4 hours. Natalie looked at the digital clock on the dashboard. 10:28 p.m. "Drive," Natalie said, not looking back at the hotel looming above them. "I want to be across state lines before he realizes he's not the one holding the leash anymore." Back in the ballroom, the clock struck 11 p.m. Broderick Ashworth checked his Rolex. Irritation began to prickle at the back of his neck. The senator had arrived, shaken hands, and was now mingling near the bar. Broderick needed Natalie. He needed the picture of the happy, stable power couple to quell the quiet rumors that his personal life was as volatile as his temper. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. It went straight to voicemail. "Damn it, Natalie," he muttered, shoving the phone back into his tuxedo pocket. He scanned the room, his eyes narrowing. She wasn't by the buffet. She wasn't on the terrace. He signaled to his head of security, a towering man named Graves who stood by the entrance. Graves had been with Broderick for 10 years, cleaning up messes that ranged from drunk driving incidents to silencing disgruntled employees. Graves walked over, his earpiece coiled tightly against his thick neck. "Mr. Ashworth?" "Where is she?" Broderick demanded, keeping his voice low but venomous. "She went to the powder room 45 minutes ago. I haven't seen her return, sir. I'll check the lobby." Broderick forced a smile as a potential investor walked by, raising his glass in a mock toast. But inside, a cold knot of unease was forming. Natalie was obedient. She was fearful. In 5 years, she had never defied a direct order, and she certainly never made him wait. 10 minutes later, Graves returned. His face was pale. "Sir," Graves whispered, leaning in close. "She's not in the hotel." Broderick froze. "What do you mean, not in the hotel? Did she take the limo?" "No, sir. The driver is still out front. The doormen didn't see her leave. I checked the security feed from the main lobby. She never walked out the front doors. Then where the hell is she? Broderick hissed, grabbing Graves's arm hard enough to bruise. Women don't just vanish into thin air, Graves. We checked the service corridors, sir. We found her clutch purse in the service elevator bin. It was empty. Broderick released his grip. His mind raced. Kidnapping. That had to be it. Someone had taken her. It was a ransom play. He was a high-value target. It was only a matter of time before someone tried to get to him through her. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over him. Not for her safety, but for the exposure. If the police got involved, they would look into his life. They would look into his finances. "Get the car," Broderick ordered, his face hardening into a mask of stone. "We're leaving. Now." "But the senator. To hell with the senator. If this is a kidnapping, I need to be at a secure line. I need to control the narrative before the press gets wind of it." The ride back to their penthouse on Fifth Avenue was silent and terrifyingly fast. Broderick sat in the back, staring at his phone, waiting for the ransom call. He was already calculating how much he would have to pay. 5 million? 10? He could liquidate some assets in the morning. When they arrived at the penthouse, the silence of the apartment was deafening. It was a sprawling, modern fortress of glass and steel, usually kept immaculate by the housekeeping staff. "Check the rooms," Broderick barked at Graves. "See if anything was taken." If there was a struggle, Broderick marched into his study, pouring himself a stiff scotch. He sat behind his massive mahogany desk, staring at the landline, willing it to ring. "Sir!" Graves's voice echoed from the master bedroom. It wasn't the voice of a man who had found a struggle. It was the voice of a man who was confused. Broderick slammed his drink down and ran to the bedroom. The room was pristine. The bed was made. But the walk-in closet, Natalie's closet, was open. Broderick walked in. Her designer dresses were all there. The furs, the shoes, the bags. Everything was exactly where it should be. "Nothing's missing," Broderick said, confused. If she left, she didn't take anything. "Sir," Graves pointed to the vanity table. "Look." In the center of the marble vanity, sitting alone, was a small black velvet box. Broderick approached it slowly. He opened it. Inside was her wedding ring, a 10-carat diamond solitaire. Underneath the ring was a small, folded piece of paper. Broderick's hands shook as he unfolded it. It wasn't a ransom note. It wasn't a frantic scrawl of a victim. It was typed, neat, and precise. It read, "Check the safe behind the painting, Broderick, and then check the news." Broderick felt the blood drain from his face. He turned and sprinted back to his study. He ripped the authentic Monet painting off the wall, revealing a wall safe. His fingers fumbled as he punched in the code. 1908/45. The safe door clicked open. It was empty. The stacks of cash he kept for emergencies? Gone. The passports? Gone. But that wasn't what made his knees buckle. The black ledger. The physical book where he kept the codes to his offshore shell companies, the names of the politicians he had bribed, and the records of the illegal arms shipments to embargoed nations. It was gone. Broderick fell back into his leather chair, gasping for air. Natalie didn't just leave. She hadn't been kidnapped. She had been watching. For years. She knew the code. She knew where the bodies were buried. Suddenly, his phone began to buzz. Then the landline. Then Graves's phone. Graves looked at his screen, his eyes wide. "Sir, you need to see this." He held up his tablet. YouTube was open. A video had just been uploaded 10 minutes ago. It already had 50,000 views. The title was, "The Truth About Ashworth Dynamics, a Message from Natalie." Broderick stared at the thumbnail. It was Natalie, sitting in a dimly lit room, wearing a simple grey hoodie, looking directly into the camera. "Play it," Broderick whispered, his voice sounding like it belonged to a dead man. Graves pressed play. Natalie's voice filled the room, calm, clear, and devastating. "My name is Natalie Ashworth. If you are watching this, I am already gone. For 5 years, I have been the silent wife of Broderick Ashworth. I have seen the bribes, I have seen the illegal contracts, and I have kept the receipts. Tonight, I am releasing everything." As the video played, the sound of sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder and louder, coming closer to Fifth Avenue. Broderick looked out the window. Down below, blue and red lights washed over the street. It wasn't just a few cars. It was a fleet. The FBI was here. And it wasn't morning yet. The nightmare had only just begun. The pounding on the penthouse door was rhythmic, heavy, and authoritative. "Federal agents, open the door." Broderick sat frozen in his chair, the Scotch glass in his hand, trembling so violently the ice clattered against the crystal. On the screen, Natalie's video continued to play. She was currently detailing the Project Orion deal, a transaction Broderick had sworn was buried so deep that God himself couldn't find it. "Graves," Broderick croaked, "don't let them in." Graves, usually the picture of stoic loyalty, took a step back. He looked at the door, then at his boss, and then at the empty safe. He knew a sinking ship when he saw one. "I can't stop the FBI, sir," Graves said, his voice flat. He reached for his earpiece and pulled it out, dropping it on the expensive Persian rug. "And I'm not going down for obstruction. I was just security. I didn't know about the books." "You coward!" Broderick roared, standing up. "I pay you to—" Crash! The double doors of the penthouse splintered open. A dozen agents in tactical gear swarmed the room, weapons drawn. Behind them walked a man in a cheap suit with a weary expression. It was Special Agent Miller from the Financial Crimes Division. Broderick recognized him. He had tried to subpoena Broderick 3 years ago, and Broderick's lawyers had humiliated him in court. Miller didn't look humiliated now. He looked like a man who had just won the lottery. "Broderick Ashworth," Miller announced, his voice booming over the chaos. "You are under arrest for racketeering, money laundering, conspiracy to commit fraud, and violations of the international arms trafficking regulations." "You have no proof," Broderick shouted, his arrogance trying to fight through the panic. "This is harassment. I'll have your badge by morning." Miller smirked, walking over to the desk. He glanced at the tablet where Natalie's face was still frozen on the screen. "We don't need to look very hard for proof, Mr. Ashworth," Miller said. "Your wife just emailed the Department of Justice a zip file containing 4,000 documents. We've been cross-referencing them for the last hour. The metadata matches your internal servers perfectly." 2 agents grabbed Broderick's arms, wrenching them behind his back. The cold steel of handcuffs clicked shut, a sound much louder than the applause he had received at the Gala just hours ago. "She's lying," Broderick spat as they dragged him toward the door. "She's mentally unstable. She's been off her medication. It's a setup." "We'll see," Miller said, picking up Broderick's phone from the desk. "But usually, mentally unstable people don't transfer $200 million out of Cayman Island accounts using biometric authentication that only you were supposed to have." Broderick stopped struggling. The blood drained from his face completely. "What?" "Oh, you didn't check your balances," Miller mocked. "While you were at the Gala, someone emptied the liquidity accounts, the rainy day fund. I believe you called it in your internal memos. It's gone, Broderick. You're broke." As Broderick was hauled out of his penthouse, the paparazzi were already waiting downstairs. The flashbulbs blinded him. The questions were shouted like accusations. "Broderick, is it true you sold defective armor to the military? Broderick, where is your wife? Broderick, are you bankrupt?" He was shoved into the back of a squad car, his tuxedo crumpled, his dignity shredded. As the car pulled away, he caught a glimpse of a digital billboard in Times Square. It was usually an ad for Coca-Cola, but someone had hacked the feed. For a brief 10 seconds, a message flashed across the giant screen in bold white letters against a black background. "Karma has no deadline." Broderick squeezed his eyes shut. She was watching. Somewhere she was watching. The holding cell at the Southern District of New York Federal Court did not smell like the Pierre Hotel. It smelled of industrial bleach, old sweat, and despair. Broderick Ashworth sat on a cold steel bench, his tuxedo jacket folded neatly beside him, a ridiculous remnant of a life that felt like it had existed a decade ago, not just 6 hours. The bespoke Giorgio Armani fabric was now gathering dust on a floor that had seen things Broderick usually paid people to keep away from his eyesight. He had been processed, fingerprinted, mug-shot taken. He had been forced to trade his cufflinks for a plastic baggie with a prisoner number written on it in Sharpie. "Ashworth," a guard barked, rapping his baton against the bars. "Lawyers here." The heavy door buzzed open. Broderick stood up, smoothing his shirt, trying to summon the aura of the CEO who commanded rooms. But without his entourage, his height, and his checkbook, the aura flickered and died. He was led into a small, windowless room where a man was waiting. It wasn't his usual general counsel. It was Richard Donovan, the managing partner of Donovan and Wraith, the kind of law firm you called when you killed someone, not when you merged companies. Donovan looked tired. He had a file thick enough to stop a bullet on the metal table. "Get me out, Richard," Broderick said, sitting down. "I want bail posted immediately. I don't care about the cost. Use the offshore reserves if the domestic accounts are frozen." Donovan didn't open the file. He just looked at Broderick with a mixture of pity and professional detachment. "Broderick, you need to listen to me very carefully," Donovan said, his voice low. "There is no bail. Don't be absurd. Everyone has a price. The judge is Harriet Vance. She's built her career on crushing white-collar criminals. And even if we drew a friendly judge, we have a problem with the collateral." "What problem?" "The money is gone, Broderick. All of it." Broderick slammed his hand on the table. "I know the liquid cash is gone. Natalie took the operating accounts. But I have assets. The real estate. The Hamptons estate. The penthouse. The yacht in Monaco." Donovan sighed and opened the file. He slid a piece of paper across the table. It was a property deed transfer record. At 9 a.m. yesterday morning, a notary in Delaware processed a transfer of ownership for the penthouse, the Hamptons estate, and the Aspen Lodge. They were transferred into a holding trust controlled by a shell corporation. "I didn't authorize that." "No," Donovan said. "But you did. Or at least, someone using your verified digital signature did. The trust is called the Phoenix Foundation. It's a non-profit registered for the aid of victims of domestic violence and corporate fraud." Broderick stared at the paper. The letters swam before his eyes. "She gave my houses to a charity? She didn't just give them away. She liquidated the equity first. The properties are leveraged to the hilt. The banks own the bricks. The charity owns the deed. You own nothing but the debt." Broderick felt bile rise in his throat. This wasn't just a theft. This was a surgical dismantling of his entire existence. "And the offshore accounts?" Broderick whispered. "The FBI has the ledger, Broderick. Natalie didn't just leak it to the press. She sent the encryption keys to the DOJ. They froze the Cayman accounts 30 minutes ago. The Swiss are cooperating because they don't want to be blacklisted. You are currently the poorest man in this building. Broderick slumped back. So, I'm stuck here? Until the arraignment, yes. And probably until trial. You're a flight risk, Broderick. Or you would be, if you had a passport. Which, according to the inventory of your safe, is also missing. Broderick put his head in his hands. Where is she, Richard? Tell me you have investigators looking for her. She can't just vanish. She has to be somewhere. 300 miles away, the somewhere was a dingy truck stop diner off I-95 in rural Maryland. Natalie, now sporting short, chestnut-dyed hair and coloured contacts that made her eyes look hazel, sat in a booth with peeling red vinyl seats. She was eating a greasy grilled cheese sandwich with an appetite she hadn't felt in years. For the last decade, Broderick had monitored her caloric intake, chiding her if she gained a single pound. Across from her sat Riley, tapping furiously on a jagged-looking laptop that was hardwired into the diner's shaky Wi-Fi. The transfer is complete, Riley murmured, not looking up from the screen. The last of the liquid assets have been dispersed. We used the Robin Hood protocol. 50 distinct wire transfers to 50 distinct charities. Clean water initiatives in Sudan. Legal defense funds in Chicago. Shelters in Seattle. It's untraceable and, more importantly, unrecoverable. Even if they catch you, no judge is going to order a battered women's shelter to return $1 million donation. Natalie took a sip of lukewarm coffee. And the media? Trending worldwide, Riley said, turning the screen around. Twitter, or X, as the tech bros called it, was on fire. The hashtag #DoTheAshworth list was the #1 topic in the United States, the UK, and Japan. People were combing through the leaked documents Natalie had released. Justice Seeker 888 just found out Ashworth Dynamics was charging the military $500 for a $10 screw. This guy is a traitor. Ashworth list. Eat the rich. Natalie Ashworth is a hero. She didn't just leave him. She burned the kingdom down on her way out. He's in a cell right now, Natalie said softly. It wasn't a question. MCC New York, Riley confirmed. They denied bail. His lawyer looked like he swallowed a lemon walking out of the courthouse. Natalie looked out the window at the rain sleeting down on the parked semi-trucks. She should feel triumphant. She had planned this for 2 years. Every smile, every nodded agreement, every time she let him grip her arm too tight. It was all fuel for this fire. But she didn't feel joy. She felt the cold exhaustion of a soldier who had just survived a bomb blast. We can't stay here, Natalie said. Broderick is arrogant, but he's not stupid. And he has friends who operate outside the law, mercenaries, private contractors. Riley nodded, closing the laptop. The car is gassed up. We have a safe house waiting in West Virginia, off the grid. No cell service, no internet. We go dark for 3 weeks, while the feds tear his company apart. No, Natalie said, standing up. We don't go dark yet. Riley frowned. Nat, the plan was to vanish. You've done the damage. I've done the financial damage, Natalie corrected, pulling her hood up. But Broderick is a narcissist. He will try to spin this. He'll play the victim. He'll say I'm crazy. He'll say I fabricated the documents. Natalie reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver flash drive. I need to upload part 2. Riley's eyes widened. Part 2? What's on that? Natalie's face hardened. The insurance policy. The money hurts his pride. But this will destroy his soul. The spin began exactly 48 hours after the arrest. Broderick Ashworth had hired a PR crisis management firm, Blackwood & Stone, known for cleaning up the reputations of dictators and disgraced actors. Since Broderick was incarcerated, his spokesperson, a sharp-tongued woman named Meredith Grey, no relation to the fictional doctor, but equally dramatic, stood on the steps of the courthouse, addressing a sea of microphones. My client, Broderick Ashworth, is the victim of a sophisticated cyber attack and a domestic tragedy, Meredith announced, her voice projecting confidence. Natalie Ashworth has a long, documented history of mental instability. We have medical records indicating episodes of paranoia and delusion. She has been manipulated by eco-terrorists and anti-capitalist hackers into stealing funds to finance their radical agendas. The documents released are forgeries, deepfakes. Mr. Ashworth loves his wife and only wants her safe return so she can get the help she desperately needs. It was a good story. It played into the sexist tropes of the hysterical woman. It cast the billionaire as the long-suffering husband. Inside the MCC, Broderick watched the coverage on the small TV in the common room. He smirked. That's it, he thought. Sow the doubt. Make her look crazy. If he could discredit the source, he could fight the charges. He could claim the ledger was fake. But Broderick had forgotten one crucial rule of the digital age. Never start a war with someone who has the admin password. At 6 p.m. Eastern Time, just as the evening news was digesting the mental instability narrative, phones across the country buzzed with a notification. Natalie's YouTube channel had uploaded a new video. Title: He calls it love, I call it evidence. Broderick's heart hammered against his ribs as the news channel cut away from the pundit to show the video live. The screen was black. There was no video feed, only audio. The waveform danced on the screen, reacting to the voices. Date stamp: October 14th, 2024. Location: Ashworth Penthouse. Voice of Broderick. You think you're clever, Natalie? You think because you sit on the board of the museum you have influence? Voice of Natalie, shaky. I just said I didn't want to sign the papers without reading them, Broderick. Sound of glass shattering. Voice of Broderick, shouting. You sign what I tell you to sign. I bought you. I bought the clothes on your back, the food in your stomach, and the air you breathe. If you ever try to look at my books again, I will have you committed. I know a doctor at Sinai who owes me a favor. One signature, and you're locked away in a padded room for the rest of your life. Do you understand me? Voice of Natalie, sobbing. Yes, I understand. Voice of Broderick. Good. Now pick up this glass, and if you cut yourself, don't bleed on the rug. It's worth more than your family. The audio cut out. The news anchor on the screen sat in stunned silence. There was no spin for that. There was no out of context. It was the raw, unvarnished sound of a monster. In the common room of the prison, the other inmates turned to look at Broderick. Prison is a hierarchy. There are murderers, thieves, and gang members. But even among criminals there is a code. Men who beat women, men who treat them like property, occupy the lowest rung of the ladder. A large man with tattoos covering his neck stood up from the bench across the room. He pointed a finger at the TV, then at Broderick. That you? The man asked, his voice low and dangerous. That you talking to your lady like that? Broderick scrambled backward. It's a deep fake. It's AI, voice synthesis. Didn't sound like AI to me, the man said, taking a step closer. Sounded like a bully. Guards rushed in immediately, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Ashworth, lock up, now! As Broderick was shoved back toward his solitary cell for his own protection, he realized the walls were closing in. The legal strategy was dead. The public sympathy was dead. Back in the safe house in West Virginia, Natalie sat on the floor, watching the comments roll in on the video. Sarah Jenkins, I lived with a man like this for 10 years. That sound, the sound of the glass breaking, I know that sound. We believe you, Natalie. Tech Watch. Analyze the audio waveform. No signs of synthesis or splicing. That's raw audio. He's done. Natalie closed the laptop. She didn't feel triumphant. She felt light. For the first time in 5 years, the weight on her chest was gone. The FBI just issued a warrant for the doctor mentioned in the recording, Riley said, entering the room with 2 beers. Dr. Aris Thorne from Mount Sinai. Turns out, he's been falsifying psychiatric evaluations for wealthy husbands for years. You didn't just take down Broderick, you exposed a whole network. Natalie took the beer, her hands finally steady. It's not over, she said. Broderick is cornered. That makes him dangerous. He still has 1 card left to play. What card? He's broke and hated. The Project Omega file, Natalie said, her eyes darkening. The one file I didn't release. Riley froze. Why didn't you release it? Because it's not about money. It's about treason. It involves a senator, the same senator who was at the Gala. Natalie stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the dark woods. I kept it as leverage. If Broderick thinks he can arrange a hit on me from inside prison, or if the government tries to cut him a deal to keep him quiet, I release Omega. It's the nuclear option. You're playing a dangerous game, Nat, Riley warned. You're blackmailing the US government now. I'm not blackmailing them, Natalie said, a cold smile touching her lips. I'm just ensuring that my divorce settlement includes my freedom. Suddenly, the burner phone in Riley's pocket buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a proximity alarm. Riley checked the screen and her face went pale. Sensors on the driveway just tripped, she whispered. 2 SUVs. Blacked out. No plates. Natalie grabbed her backpack. They found us. How? We were careful. Broderick didn't find us, Natalie said, heading for the back door. The senator did. The back door of the cabin burst open, not from a kick, but from the silent, hydraulic hiss of a battering ram designed to minimize noise. The senator's cleanup crew wasn't here to make a scene. They were here to sanitize one. Natalie and Riley were already moving. They had practiced this. During the long, empty afternoons in the penthouse, while Broderick was at work, Natalie hadn't just been shopping online. She had been studying urban evasion and survival tactics, watching hours of instructional videos on the dark web, preparing for the day the cage door would open. Go, 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 Natalie whispered, shoving Riley toward the trapdoor hidden beneath the rug in the pantry. It led to a root cellar that opened out into the creek bed behind the property. Riley scrambled down the ladder, clutching the backpack containing the drives. Natalie followed, pausing only to smash the screen of the laptop they left behind and toss it into the microwave, turning the dial to 10 minutes. It wouldn't destroy the data, but the sparking metal would create a distraction and a fire. They dropped into the damp earth of the cellar just as heavy boots thudded onto the floorboards above. "Clear left," a voice shouted above them. "Check the bedrooms. The target is the brunette. The other one is expendable." Natalie's blood ran cold. Expendable. They were going to kill Riley just for being the driver. They crawled through the narrow tunnel, the smell of wet soil filling their noses. It was tight, claustrophobic, and pitch black. Riley was hyperventilating, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Breathe," Natalie commanded softly, gripping Riley's ankle. "Panic kills you faster than a bullet." They emerged into the freezing air of the creek bed, the water rushing over their shoes. The night was moonless, the woods a wall of impenetrable shadow. "My car," Riley chattered, her teeth clicking together. "We need the car." "The car is a trap," Natalie said, pulling her toward the dense tree line. "They'll have the driveway blocked. We walk." "Walk? To where?" The nearest town is 10 miles away. There's a hunting tower 2 miles north on the ridge, Natalie said, checking her compass, an old analog one, untrackable. It's high ground, and it has a line of sight to the cell tower in the valley. Why does that matter? Because the upload requires a 5G connection, and we're in a dead zone, Natalie hissed. We have to upload Project Omega. It's the only shield we have left. Once that information is public, killing us becomes pointless because the secret is already out. They began to climb. The terrain was brutal. Slick mud, tangled roots, and jagged rocks. Behind them, the cabin suddenly erupted in a flash of orange light. The microwave had done its job. The fire would draw the mercenaries' attention, buying them maybe 10 minutes. 20 minutes into the hike, Riley stumbled, crying out in pain. She had twisted her ankle on a loose rock. "I can't," Riley sobbed, clutching her leg. "Go, Nat. Take the drive. Leave me." Natalie stopped. She looked down at the woman who had risked everything for her. Riley was the only person who had treated her like a human being in 5 years. "Broderick left people behind," Natalie said, hoisting Riley's arm over her shoulder. "I don't." They moved slower now, a painful trudge up the incline. The sound of snapping twigs echoed behind them. They were being hunted. The mercenaries were using thermal optics. Natalie knew it. They couldn't hide, so they had to outrun them. A bullet whizzed past Natalie's ear, embedding itself in a pine tree with a dull thwack. No gunshot sound. They were using silencers. "Run!" Natalie screamed, abandoning stealth. They scrambled up the final embankment, their lungs burning. The hunting tower loomed ahead, a skeletal wooden structure rising above the canopy. "Get up the ladder!" Natalie yelled, pushing Riley upward. Another shot hit the dirt near Natalie's feet, kicking up spray. Natalie turned and threw a rock into the brush to the left, hoping to confuse the shooter's aim, then sprinted up the ladder. They collapsed onto the platform of the tower, 30 feet in the air. The wind was howling up here. "The drive!" Natalie shouted. Riley fumbled with the backpack, pulling out the laptop. She opened it. Signal strength, 2 bars. "It's enough!" Riley yelled. She jammed the flash drive into the USB port. The screen lit up, initiating upload. Project Omega. Files detected 50 GB. "It's too big," Riley panicked. "At this speed, it'll take 5 minutes." Below them, 3 dark figures emerged from the tree line. They gathered at the base of the tower. They didn't shoot. They knew the women were trapped. One of the men, wearing tactical night vision goggles, looked up. "Mrs. Ashworth," he called out, his voice calm and professional. "There's no need for this. The senator just wants to talk. Come down, hand over the drive, and you walk away with $5 million in cash. A fresh start." Natalie peered over the edge. "And if I don't?" "Then we cut the supports to this tower, and gravity does the rest. It'll look like a tragic hiking accident." The upload bar crawled. 20%. 25%. "I don't negotiate with terrorists," Natalie shouted down. "Wrong answer." The man pulled a hatchet from his belt and swung it hard into the wooden support beam. The tower shuddered. "Natalie!" Riley screamed, watching the screen. 40%. Thwack, thwack. The wood was splintering. The tower groaned, tilting slightly to the left. "Do something," Riley cried. Natalie looked around the small platform. There was nothing. No weapons. Just an old flare gun kit in a rusty metal box bolted to the railing. Standard emergency gear for hunters stranded in storms. Natalie smashed the lock with her elbow. Ignoring the pain, she ripped the box open. 1 flare gun, 1 shell. She loaded it. Below, the men were working on the second support beam. The tower swayed violently. Upload, 80%. Natalie didn't aim at the men. At this distance, in the dark, she'd miss. She aimed at the dry brush surrounding the base of the tower. brush that hadn't seen rain in 3 weeks. She pulled the trigger. The flare hissed through the air, burning a brilliant, blinding magnesium red. It slammed into the dead leaves and pine needles right next to the mercenaries. Whoosh! The fire caught instantly, fueled by the wind. A wall of flame erupted, separating the men from the tower. The heat was intense, forcing the mercenaries to scramble back, coughing and shielding their faces. "The tower!" one of them yelled. "It's going to burn! Let it burn!" Natalie screamed, holding the railing as the platform shook. Upload, 99%. The flames were licking up the wooden legs of the tower now. The smoke was thick, choking them. Upload complete. "It's done!" Riley choked out, slamming the laptop shut. "It's on the cloud. It's everywhere. Every news outlet, the DOJ, the ACLU. It's gone." Natalie grabbed Riley. "Jump!" "What?" "The fire is on the north side. The creek is on the south. There's a deep pool below us. We have to jump." The tower gave a final, sickening groan and began to topple into the fire. Natalie didn't wait for permission. She grabbed Riley's hand and leaped into the black void just as the structure collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and timber. They hit the freezing water hard, the impact knocking the wind out of them. But they were alive. The dawn that broke over the smouldering remains of the hunting tower was grey and choked with soot. The structure had collapsed entirely, reducing the historic wooden lookout to a heap of blackened timber and twisted metal. Special Agent Miller stood at the edge of the police tape, his shoes sinking into the mud that had been churned up by the firefight. The fire had been intense, hot enough to warp the steel frame of the tower's base. Forensic teams in white biohazard suits moved like ghosts through the mist, sifting through the ash with small trowels. "Agent Miller." Miller turned to see the lead forensic investigator, a woman named Dr. Aris, no relation to the corrupt doctor. She looked grim, holding a plastic evidence bag containing a charred, fragmented piece of something that looked disturbingly organic. "We found remains," she said softly, "near the base of where the platform would have been. It's difficult to say much without a lab, but based on the pelvic bone structure and the dental fragments we recovered from the soil, we have 2 distinct sets of remains, both female." Miller felt a heavy stone settle in his stomach. He had wanted to arrest Natalie Ashworth for the unauthorized wire transfers, sure, but he hadn't wanted this. He hadn't wanted her to burn. "Are you sure?" Miller asked, looking at the dark, rushing water of the creek below. "They couldn't have jumped?" "It's an 80-foot drop into shallow water filled with jagged rocks," the investigator sighed. "And the fire was accelerant-fueled. If the fall didn't kill them, the thermal shock or the smoke inhalation did before they ever hit the ground. We're running the DNA against the samples we took from the penthouse. But prepare yourself for a match." The news broke 3 hours later. Tragedy in West Virginia. Fugitive socialite and accomplice presumed dead in standoff. The narrative was tragic and final. The world mourned Natalie Ashworth not as a thief, but as a martyr. The comments on her YouTube channel transformed into a digital wake, a shrine to a woman who had spoken truth to power and paid the ultimate price. 3 months later, the Southern District of New York. The courtroom was packed. It was the trial of the century, not for the defendant, but for the sheer volume of corruption being exposed. Broderick Ashworth sat at the defense table. He looked like a husk of the man who had hosted the Titans' Gala. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a twitchy, hollow-eyed paranoia. He wasn't just facing fraud charges anymore. The Project Omega files, which had successfully uploaded seconds before the tower fell, had connected Ashworth Dynamics to a treasonous plot involving the sale of classified drone encryptions to foreign operatives. The senator had already turned state's evidence, pointing the finger squarely at Broderick to save his own skin. "Mr. Ashworth," Judge O'Malley said, peering over her spectacles. The courtroom went deathly silent. "In light of the overwhelming evidence provided by the Omega leaks and the testimony regarding your involvement in the racketeering scheme, the jury has found you guilty on all 24 counts." Broderick didn't flinch. He just stared at the empty seat in the gallery. He kept expecting her to walk in. He kept expecting Natalie to be there, gloating. "But," the judge continued, her voice hardening, "it is the posthumous evidence regarding the abuse and subsequent death of your wife that weighs most heavily on this court's conscience. You created the circumstances that led to her demise. You are a danger to society, Mr. Ashworth." Broderick stood up, his chains rattling. "She's not dead!" he screamed, his voice cracking. "Don't you see? She's doing this to me. She's watching." "Sit down, Mr. Ashworth," the bailiff barked. "She tampered with the dental records," Broderick raved, his eyes wild. "She hacked the database. It's a trick. She's alive. She's laughing at us." The jury looked at him with disgust. To them he was a madman, unable to accept the reality of the tragedy he had caused. "Broderick Ashworth," the judge announced, banging her gavel. "I sentence you to life in federal prison without the possibility of parole. May God have mercy on your soul." As the bailiffs dragged him away, Broderick didn't scream about his money. He didn't scream about his company. He screamed her name. He knew, deep in the dark, twisted pit of his gut, that he had been beaten. But no one believed him. He was Cassandra, cursed to speak the truth when it sounded like madness. The Amalfi Coast, Italy. The Mediterranean sun was different from the sun in New York. It didn't glare, it embraced. 6 months had passed since the fire. The world had moved on, as the world always does. Ashworth Dynamics had been liquidated. The Phoenix Foundation, the charity Natalie had set up, was now fully operational, funding shelters across the globe with the billions stripped from Broderick's empire. High on a cliffside, overlooking the azure sea, sat a small, whitewashed villa. It was modest, surrounded by lemon groves and the scent of wild thyme. On the terrace, a woman sat painting. Her hair was short and blonde, and her skin was bronzed by months of outdoor labor. She wore a simple linen dress. Riley walked out onto the terrace, carrying a tray with 2 glasses of chilled limoncello and a tablet. "You have to see this," Riley said, placing the tablet on the iron table. The screen showed a news report from America. It was footage of Broderick being transferred to a Supermax facility in Colorado. He looked old, defeated. "He's in ADX Florence," Riley said, taking a sip of her drink. 23-hour lockdown, solitary confinement. He'll never see another human face without bars in between them again. The woman, Natalie, glanced at the screen for only a second. She felt nothing. No joy, no anger, no pity. It was like looking at a stranger. "And the investigator?" Natalie asked, dipping her brush into cerulean blue paint. "Dr. Aris? Promoted," Riley grinned. "The FBI closed the case officially yesterday. They accepted the DNA match on the teeth found at the site." Natalie smiled, turning back to her canvas. It was a painting of the sea, vast, deep, and untamable. The escape had been the most terrifying 10 minutes of her life. They had jumped, but they hadn't hit the rocks. They had aimed for the deep pool formed by the beaver dam 50 yards downstream, a detail Natalie had noted on an old geological survey map she found in the cabin. The remains hadn't been them, of course. Before leaving New York, Natalie had accessed the National Dental Database using Broderick's own backdoor clearance codes. She hadn't just swapped the records, she had replaced her file with the dental metrics of a John Doe cadaver from a medical university archive. records of a woman who had died in a fire years ago. As for the bone fragments at the scene, a gruesome but necessary addition from the medical supply cooler they had raided on the way out of the city, planted in the debris field before they climbed the tower. It was a gamble, a 1-in-a-million shot. But Natalie knew one thing about the system. It wanted closure more than it wanted the truth. "Do you think he knows?" Riley asked, leaning against the railing. "Do you think Broderick knows we're alive?" Natalie washed her brush in the jar of water, watching the blue swirl and fade. "I hope he does," she said softly. "I hope every time he closes his eyes, he sees me. I hope the uncertainty eats him alive. That is his prison. This—" She gestured to the lemon groves, the sea, and the endless sky. "This is my life." She stood up and walked to the edge of the terrace. Below, a small fishing boat was cutting through the water, leaving a white wake behind it. She was no longer Mrs. Ashworth. She was no longer the victim. She was a ghost who had learned how to breathe. "Come on," Natalie said, turning to Riley with a genuine, brilliant smile. "The boat is waiting. We have to pick up the catch of the day." "Aye, aye, Captain," Riley laughed. They walked down the stone steps toward the water, leaving the tablet on the table. On the screen, the video ended, and the face of Broderick Ashworth faded to black, leaving only his reflection in the dark glass, a man trapped in a box, while the woman he tried to own sailed into the sun. And there you have it, the complete saga of Natalie Ashworth. She played the long game, sacrificed her identity, and used her husband's own arrogance to build a cage for him and a paradise for herself. It's a reminder that true freedom isn't given. Sometimes it has to be stolen. I really hope you enjoyed this long-form series. Writing this journey was a roller coaster. If you made it to the end, comment Project Omega below so I know who the real loyal listeners are. Please don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. I have a new thriller story coming next week involving a deceptive butler and a missing will that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching. And remember, karma is always watching.